Good morning, everyone, or whatever time it is across the world. So happy to have our Italian team here again. It's been a while since they visited, and it's always brilliant. So some structural things, excuse me. They will be talking first, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. If you want to share something with the chat, or you have a comment or a question, just write it in the chat. And unless you say it's private, we'll go ahead and read it. We're going to see if that procedure makes more sense for us going forward. So it's a little bit of an experiment. I will let all of the people on the panel introduce themselves and say a little whatever they want to say about themselves. And they're great speakers, so I will immediately, right now, hand it over.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe we can wait for the Eleonora. I don't know if Eleonora is here. Sorry, because I cannot. Okay, yes, Eleonora is here.
Eleonora
okay.
and Ariel.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry. Here I am with, I'm Alice Scavarda, and maybe lots of people here know me, and I'm here with Ariel Cascio, which is okay. Thank you. Okay. It's Italian time. Yes, here in Italy it's afternoon. It's late afternoon. Okay, and I'm very glad to host this meeting, this seminar with Ariel, because it's the second time for us, and the topic is participatory emancipatory research with in the context of critical autism studies. Ariel, do you want to introduce yourself, please? We are co-coordinating the session, of course.
Yep, certainly. Hello. My name is, in Italian, I would say Ariel Cascio. Ariel Cassio, after we crossed the ocean. I am an assistant professor at Michigan State University in the United States, and I also host the Living Ethics Hangouts here at KC. I have done research about autism in the United States, Italy, Canada, Germany, and France. So I like to bring some cross-cultural autism studies to our conversations here, and I'm just really happy to be spending time with my Italian colleagues here today. I won't talk much. I might ask some questions. If we don't have questions from the audience, we have some facilitator panel questions. I also wrote in my profile, I'm fairly proficient in English to Italian and vice versa. If we have any translation questions, extremely informal, unprofessional translations, I can try to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, just two brief information about me, about myself. I am an assistant professor of sociology in Italy, and I'm a disability studies and critical autism studies scholar. I wrote some papers with Ariel. This is why because we basically did the same PhD project in the same period in Italy, and so it was like we met each other during a conference, and so this is why we collaborate. Since a while we are collaborating, writing papers and books also on these topics. But today we are only, as Ariel said, we are only coordinating this seminar because we want to give the floor to other two Italian colleagues. I'm going to present them, and then, of course, we will pose them some questions and to understand also what they are doing currently in Italy. We are very glad to have here Ilaria Minio Paluello, which works at the Institute for Cognitive Sciences and Technologies of the Italian National Research Council, and at the Social Cognitive Neuroscience Laboratory at Sapienza University of Rome. And then of course, Ilaria, you can add something about you, and if you want to introduce yourself. And the other speaker today is Eleonora Marocchini, which is a neurodivergent psycholinguist and independent researcher in social sciences at the Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education, and Critical University Studies Fellow at the University of Durham. So yes, Ilaria and Eleonora, if you want to add something, if you want to introduce yourself, the floor is yours, of course. Maybe first Ilaria and then Eleonora.
Okay, so thank you very much for having us here. I'm non-autistic, and I work in the field of, as Alicia said, in social cognitive neuroscience. So I'm a quantitative researcher working with neurophysiological measures and this sort of different techniques investigating the brain and the physiological systems of humans. I work with humans and also some animal models, but that's not much actually.
Thank you. Eleonora, do you want to
Yeah,
present
sure.
yourself?
Yeah, I'm a linguist by training. Then I've done my PhD in psychology and cognitive science. Then I went back to more qualitative stuff because I got in contact with autistic communities during my PhD. So my PhD was kind of looking at autistic pragmatic deficits through a very pathologizing, very traditional lens. But like throughout my PhD, I realized how misleading some of our research questions were. So, and getting in contact with autistic communities through science communication made me realize that I wasn't really happy doing that. So after my PhD, after I defended, I just left traditional academia. So the affiliations that Alice just told you are independent research centers. I'm not currently paid unless we count fellowships like as payment for research specifically. So I guess my answers throughout this meeting are gonna be to be read through the lens of independent research, so obviously not really well-funded research. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you to you both for having accepted our invitation. And so maybe we can start posing you both of you some questions. Arya, do you want to pose the first question?
Yes, thank you. I would like each of you to tell us how you got started with participatory autism research. Maybe you can tell us what your first project was.
I think we should establish that Ilaria goes first, so we're set for
so that we
okay.
know. Or you go first, whatever you like. So I've got some problems because I prepared some slides and I love to also to see things, but then I think that going back and forth with sharing slides is gonna be a mess. So I think let's forget about my slides and then we talk only. And then in case I can share them for people, if people want to watch, because I love also to show results and things, how a participatory approach actually impacted things. But anyway, so it all started, I've been involved in support. I see myself as a, I don't know, like a catalyzer. Anyway, somehow as an amplifier of autistic voices. So I'm not autistic myself. I've been since 1994 volunteering at the beginning for autistic people, then with autistic people, and then as I became a researcher, for me it was pretty obvious that research needed a shift in perspective. And then when I found out that participatory autism, participatory research actually existed at the beginning, I thought, oh, this is great. But I was not thinking, oh, I should do it. Then I did it. We are doing it. So my involvement in autism participatory research is pretty recent. I would say in the past 5 years or so. And it started by I guess by setting up a group that at the beginning was informal, we didn't have a name yet, and Eleonora is part of this group. Now this group has got a name, it's called ORPA, which means, the English translation would be Officine is like workshop for autism participatory research. Anyway, our objective, we are a mix of people. Some of them have got a research background, some of them do not. Some of them are autistic, some are not, some are parents of autistic people, but all these categories intertwined, as is often the case in participatory research projects. And we are the first Italian, what's the word? The partnership between academia, let's say, and non-academia. And so we started off by organizing an online training workshop, 2-day workshop, and was huge. We had like 22 speakers, 50% of them were autistic, and maybe with other conditions as well. And a lot of international keynote speakers like Cristina Nicolaides or Elisabeth Pellicano, and we got a big turnout. I mean, in the sense that a lot of people were actually interested in it. So the objectives of ORPA are to like we had to self-train ourselves, then to promote autism participatory research in Italy, and we are hoping also to be able to consult and to help individual research groups to carry out autism participatory research studies. So ORPA itself, the partnership does not carry out participatory research. The researchers or the community members, autistic community members, may take part and collaborate among each others, but outside of ORPA itself. So I don't know whether I actually answered your question, Ariel, but afterwards I will be happy to speak about specific examples of participatory research that I've been involved and I'm involved in. And really, I would like to spend some time saying how the participatory approach, what impact on different levels had the participatory approach to our studies compared to what I was used to do before. So we like really concrete examples.
Yes, thank you. I actually would be very interested to see these slides, if we don't mind. And I'm seeing nodding as well. I don't know what's the best way to switch back and forth. What do you think?
I think it's okay. Of course, it depends on Ilaria, of course, on
why
what
don't we
she prefers.
do a little bit of questions back and forth with no slides between me and Eleonora, and then I can share some specific examples that needs visual, I think, to make more sense at the end, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, that works for me. Okay. Eleonora, how did you get started with participatory autism research?
So I think I started, so I got in contact with the word with a research project that I was conducting like right after my PhD, because my PhD was very experimental quantitative research with absolutely no participatory experience. Whilst, like, as I mentioned earlier, I realized that it wasn't really, it didn't really work for me also. Well, I got diagnosed in the process. So obviously I saw a lot of, the issues with what I was doing. And since I was working on pragmatic deficits and social communication, I ended up, obviously stumbled upon the double empathy problem. So I started conducting research on double empathy and pragmatics. So I kind of decided to go for more qualitative research, and I conducted a few focus groups with autistic people, and I also had a co-researcher who was also autistic. So when I did that, people called that participatory, and I was like, what does that mean? Because that's, of course I had kind of, I mean, people participated more than they would have in a laboratory with experimental research. But now I know that I was right to say that that was not participatory. But I got like interested in what people saw in that kind of research that made them think that. And I looked for participatory research examples, and kind of at the same time, I met Ilaria and other people that were deciding to kind of educate themselves on it. And we started out as an informal group, and then I was basically, I think the first things that I've done were not as a researcher, but like as a co-researcher, an autistic consultant in other people's projects, and specifically in Ilaria's projects. So I find it interesting that we can kind of talk about the same project from two different points of views, because I was her consultant in one of the first projects that she's conducted, and then we later collaborated again on a more participatory project, because in the first attempt it was just, you know, some consultancies at the end of the project, like, you know, kind of sharing results and trying to understand how to better interpret some things that like didn't make sense from a neurotypical point of view, whilst in more recent projects we were kind of participating in earlier stages of research, including like materials testing and kind of knowing about the research questions beforehand. So I think and now I'm trying to kind of conduct some more participatory research as I'm doing a master's in psychology after the PhD, so that I can actually be a psychologist now that I started with this thing. And I'm trying to kind of build a participatory research project for my thesis, but obviously, like, I do not have much money to do that. So I basically just added some focus groups to kind of build some measures that I'm later using for a quantitative study. And that was super helpful, because we kind of built a perception questionnaire for like the perception that people have of their condition. And we want to see whether that makes an impact in terms of quality of life and psychological well-being in autistic and ADHD adults. So obviously I kind of have to get it back to something that is like digestible for traditional academics in psychology. But I think it really adds a lot more nuance and a lot more like kind of a critical take on things that traditional psychology and like academia in general, I think, tends to kind of categorize way more like firmly and kind of objectifying even people's perception of their own condition, I'd say.
Thank you so much for your answers, and maybe I can ask you, I can elaborate a bit on what you said and ask you to both of you. So can you share with us some examples of participatory research projects, maybe where also you collaborate with each other, and what is the impact of the participatory approach within these research studies? Ilaria, if you want to go first, or it's up to you, of course, the order as you want.
So regarding the impact, I think I'll share some slides. So stop me, or also Eleonora, if you want to add, because I'm gonna focus on 3 studies. 2 have been published and 1 it's ongoing, that all regard perception of social touch. I mean, being touched by others and non-social touch. Autistic perceptions of social touch and non-social touch. And Eleonora, as she mentioned, she was a consultant in one of the studies, just for result interpretation and dissemination. And in another study, there is the one ongoing, the autistic community members, partners were involved at the beginning, also in shaping the research questions, in creating the stimuli. I mean, advising on stimuli creation and experimental paradigm. But let me share some slides, and then I think I'll try to jump over the slides. I don't even know what jump over the slides would mean, but anyway. So now,
Go through them quickly, maybe.
yeah, but
All we would
on and
say.
off. Yeah, now I am lost.
yeah.
Where? Okay, so I don't need
Yes,
this.
maybe you can
Bounce
share
around.
yes, your
Okay,
screen
do you
or
see?
no.
Did I share
No.
it already? No, not yet. Sorry. We did it before? Yes. Okay. Okay, what about now? Do you see it?
Almost. Yes.
Okay. Share. Okay, so we don't need this. Yeah, that's ORPA, the intersection between, as I mentioned, between the different kind of groups that compose ORPA, and actually you can see ORPA's people and their names. The workshop we organized, these are the two published papers. So sorry, just to, because I'm bothered by the fact that I see, do you also see, do you just see the slides, or do you see all these icons from Zoom? Sorry.
No, we just see the slides.
Okay, that's great. Much better. Okay,
Yes.
so some impacts of the participatory approach on experimental questions and dependent variables used. So dependent variables, I don't know people's backgrounds, but it's what you measure and what you expect to, the measures you expect to be able to show a change based on what you're doing in the study. So you modify something, and then you expect to record the change by measuring different things. Can be questionnaires, can be heart rate. I mean, can be like the heart, can be all other sort of measures. So we wanted to how it impacted experimental questions. For example, in these studies regarding autistic perception of being touched by others, of social touch, we wanted to try to validate subjective experiences of autistic people. They were told in different formats, with both with quantitative measures and also in the current studies with objective measures. So not self-report measures, but also objective measures. And then another impact it had on these two published studies was to focus on differences among autistic people instead of always looking at differences between autistic versus the so-called neurotypical people. For example, this is a practical impact of the current study that we are currently working on the experimental questions and dependent variables. So the autistic consultants told us in this study we are assessing how autistic people respond to virtually being touched by others. So they are like in a fully immersive virtual reality setup with that helmet, and they are either touched. Let me show you so you get a better idea. Sorry. So they either this is that she's wearing the virtual reality setup, and a lot of cables are attached to her. That's the setup of the study, and her virtual hand is on a table, and she's being touched in a random sequence, either by different avatars that are so-called acquaintance on hand, or she's touched by a ball, or she's approached by a man that places a ball on a table, or her hand is squished by a rock. Okay, that's the experimental paradigm, briefly. So one impact that the participatory approach provided to the study that neurotypical researchers, we wouldn't have thought about it, not just because we're neurotypical, maybe because also we were not paying enough attention to this line of research, is the fact that there are studies showing that autistic people are more at risk of being physically abused, experience physical abuse in their life compared to non-autistic people. And so autistic co-researchers told us to take this into account. So we asked participants some physical abuse experience questionnaires. And when we take the abuse score into account, we see an effect that the more participants experienced in their previous life abuse, the more they consider being approached by a human, virtual, or being touched by a human as dangerous, as threatening. And this is true for those autistic people that report in their daily life through a questionnaires to avoid social touch. While this is not the case on the right-hand side for those autistic participants that we recruited, as they report not to avoid social touch in their daily life. So in this study, we wanted to investigate, and this was also as a result of the participatory approach. So we want to investigate differences among autistic people. So we recruited autistic people that self-report to avoid social touch in their daily life versus autistic people who report not to avoid social touch, either not to avoid it or even to like being touched by others. In our experience, this group, it's a minority group. It's hard to recruit these participants, but so far, these are preliminary results. So again, the abuse, experiences of abuse differentiate the two groups and differentiate the responses of these two groups, even both at the behavioral level and at the physiological level. So I thought that this was quite interesting. And the participatory approach also has an impact on research questions. So since we have to consider autistic community research priorities, we are currently conducting a study that focuses on suicide. And there has been, in 2021, there's been like a quite broad investigations of what different autistic communities want researchers to investigate about suicide. You know that suicide, unfortunately, is highly prevalent. Death by suicide is highly prevalent in autistic people. It's like 5 to 8 times more probable to die by suicide if you're autistic compared to if you are not autistic. So we are currently running this participatory research study investigating the acceptability and feasibility of adapted autism-adapted safety plans for suicide prevention in Italy. And we have like 4 autistic co-researchers involved right from the beginning of the project, right from choosing the experimental questions, and then 5 additional autistic adults with lived experience of suicidality in co-designing the research paradigm. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll talk a little bit more and then I ask Eleonora to provide whatever she wants. The impact of the participatory approach, and an easy, let's say, the first easy impact, but it's really necessary, it's accessibility. So it improves accessibility of the recruitment process, of the actual, I'm sorry, this is in Italian, so of the actual running the experimental study, to reduce stress and anxiety. There was recently an autistic participant who graduated university, and he feels himself to be really, he said, you know, I thought that I travel throughout Europe. I got a master degree, and I've got a partner. I mean, my life it's quite complex, and I thought I didn't need these accessible instructions. But then, when I actually looked at them, at the end, I felt much more. My stress level reduced, even if there was a background stress level that I was not aware of. And once I read the instructions with all the pictures of with the different sections, you can see here the different parts of the experiment explained, and how the room would look like and everything. He really think that made an improvement. So also the better understanding the experimental task, the questions that researchers pose to participants, it's fundamental to improve the validity of the study itself, of what the measures we are collecting, because otherwise we think we are asking A, but participants might understand B, C, D, and then we average all these answers and think that they answer A, but this is not the case. And that's an example to how to make the information sheet more accessible. And these are some spontaneous comments. We also asked, explicitly asked autistic participants to provide their feedback on the accessibility of the whole experimental study. But these were just comments that people wrote without being prompted to do so. And just by reading, I mean, you can read them. Maybe if the word were like the instructions of your experiment, it would be wonderful. I feel seen as a person without perceived judgments. People never give this kind of attention. It would take so little, just that neurotypical people understood that we, the minority, need, and we would live better. I'm not used to so much kindness. Even just by reading, I mean, reading his comments, always I feel that's even enough to make participatory research worthwhile. But of course, it's not just this, but accessibility and respect. It's really a key element. I think maybe I'll take a break. Otherwise, it's a monologue. And Eleonora, please add, and then I can add some more about the results interpretation and things like this.
Yeah, there was an interesting comment by in the chat, and they were suggesting that like results might vary using real humans, etc. There's also another question about why virtual touch was used instead of like actual touch. And I responded that I was kind of astounded by how annoying being virtually touched was. I remember you saying, you know, that you were afraid that you would not see any particular effect. And while we were testing the first materials, we were all like, ew, no, I don't want that. So I think I liked, I mean, I knew in theory, obviously, and like from a, you know, an epistemic injustice point of view, it was obvious to me that participatory research was powerful that way, but actually being part of it and not as a researcher was very useful to me to actually see how like empowering it could be to actually like point out what made and didn't make much sense. And I think that was even more interesting to me because we had that previous experience where you went to, like, you came to us asking how to interpret some results, but when we looked at the results and we asked about the experimental design, there were things that didn't make sense to us in terms of like the way you named the conditions, the way you thought these conditions should like represent specific, like, for instance, kinds of relationships in ways that we wouldn't. I don't remember precisely, but I think there was something about like some sort of a light friendship or an acquaintance touching you in some way, and we were kind of, you know, that's not what an acquaintance would do in a in an autistic relationship. And so I think being part of these other research was kind of enlightening in terms of what happens when you're actually like there from the start, and you can like point out when something doesn't make sense in the research design, so that then of course like you can still have results that you cannot like that you don't know how to interpret, because that's just science. But I think it reduces that risk significantly. And that was very interesting to me. And also I have no idea about like research on social touch. So even though I've done research in psychology and cognitive science, I was an actual like participant who did not know much about like the topics. So I think I liked the idea that my participants could feel that way, because I do agree with the comments. It was very thoughtful, and like even the process of like testing everything before the study was even launched, and that's where we got those pictures, was cool. It was cool. I think a lot of the research that I've conducted during my PhD wasn't that accessible, to be honest. And obviously that also means that we're getting results that are skewed by limits to participation to the studies. So obviously studies being more accessible and more participatory also make for better data, I'd say, even from a very traditional scientific point of view. Yeah, that's about what I was thinking.
Just to answer like a technical question, why did we use virtual reality? Because unfortunately, but I mean, the type of research that I run, we need to collect multiple measures of the same thing so that we think that the measure is reliable. So it's as if you measure how long is this table, and you take a meter, you measure once, and you read one number, and then you measure it again, the same table, and then, oh, but maybe it's like half a millimeter more, so you add, and then you measure it, and then you average all those measures, and then you think, okay, this is the real length of the table. So our experiments sometimes are boring, most of the times maybe, but because we need to take repetitive measures. In order to take repetitive measures that can be considered the same or pretty much the same with some extent, we need to have a controlled environment, experimental environment. So that's why a virtual avatar is programmed to do what we say. And if we had a real human touching and over, it would move differently, the kinematics, like the way it would move, the timing, because in our experiment, this study wants to investigate if the main research question is if people, that's why validate subjective experiences. So if autistic people report through questionnaires to avoid being touched by others in their everyday life, respond to being approached and touched by a virtual avatar, as if the touch was a threatening stimulus. So humans have got what is called the peripersonal space. So there's like a space that is around us, that it's the space usually as big as the length of our arm, pretty much, as large as the length of our arm, and it's usually the space in which humans socially interact one another, let's say. And when we are approached by something that we deemed as dangerous, could be an arrow or a stone or a wasp, we tend to respond more quickly when this threatening stimulus enters our peripersonal space. So we are checking with the physiological and also behavioral measures whether autistic people, as I say, that report to avoid social touch, when they're approached in order to be touched by an avatar, by somebody, they respond changing, let's say, their peripersonal space. So what we found, preliminary results, this is like, but we haven't shared it with Leonardo yet. So, but what we found is that autistic people who report to avoid social touch have got their peripersonal spaces larger when they are about to be touched by an avatar. So and that's similar to what happens when you're approached by a threatening stimulus, a threatening thing. While those autistic people who do not report to avoid social touch, they don't show this effect. So anyway, that's a long answer just to say that the reason why we use the virtual reality was to have a controlled experimental environment. We know that it's makes it harder to generalize to real life, but experimental studies sometimes are very away. I mean, they are very distant from everyday life. But I think that with immersive virtual reality, as Eleonora was saying, not just her, also we have 4 autistic co-researchers in the studies, but all of them, and we selected them because they report to avoid being touched by others to different extents. But all of them, all of you, because Eleonora is included, felt that the stimuli were effective in, whoa, that's annoying, or I mean, yeah, so some validity is there, even if it's virtual.
It worked, even if it was virtual. Okay. Thank you so much. Ariel, do you want to pose the next question, or?
Yes. You've both talked about sharing the results of the research, and I wanted to ask a question for more detail about that. Have you had any trouble publishing participatory research in academic journals?
So I always go first, but not so far. We've published 2 studies only, one in 2024 and one in 2025. So it's recent, but you know that there's a big gap between when you collect the data and when you eventually publish it.
Yes.
And no, we did not. And actually, there are more and more journals which explicitly ask researchers to make a statement if and how autistic people were involved in the study, at which phases. So there are some journals that have it almost as a requirement, and but more and more autism journals, I mean, require to make a statement and to say specifically, because of course we all want to avoid tokenism. So just to say, yes, there were some autistic people involved that just checked boxes, and there was no impact whatsoever in what they said. So I think that maybe this is outside of the scope of the questions, but I think it's really important and not easy to be accountable as a non-autistic researcher of what autistic co-researchers of course of how I take autistic co-researcher or consultants comments and opinions. So first of all, Christiane Corizis always says, if before disregarding a comment, you first need to make sure, did you understand it? I mean, did I understand what the people were actually telling? So first, that's really important. Then the autistic consultants, they don't have a role, they don't have to be sound in terms of research methodologies. So are the researchers, autistic or non-autistics, whatever, but are the researchers that need to be sound on research methodology. So it's my challenge to be able to translate the requirements and comments and requests into something that is scientifically sound. It's not the community partners' task. And I cannot say, okay, disregard that request just because it's difficult to implement. That's really, of course, some requests are very difficult to implement, but at least you have to try. So, sorry, I took a tangent because I'm not answering about publishing.
Good tangent.
Yeah, but I mean, we didn't find, actually, it's more and more required. And also in terms of like research fundings, because publishing is the end of the process. The first part of the process in research is finding money to conduct research studies. And even in big funding schemes like Horizon EU or NIH for those who are in the US, funding schemes, the stakeholders' involvement, it's always more and more, not always, more and more required. Of course, researchers who do tokenism can get away usually with just pretending, but I think that more and more is valued, especially in foundations funding, specifically autism researchers, the true involvement of autistic stakeholders, it's really valued. So I think it's a plus also in order to get more secure more fundings.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, true, but also I think I found it pretty difficult to fund things that are needed in order to do participatory research in Italy, because I think we're kind of a bit behind the Anglosphere in terms of participatory research. So sometimes we would need things that are not easily fit into Italian schemes. So for instance, what we are doing with ORPA, but also, I mean, I'm in another participatory research group at the University of Pavia in psychiatry, actually. And in both of these situations, there are very different situations, because that's a very, like, ORPA is more of a group that is scattered throughout Italy, and we meet virtually, whilst the University of Pavia has its own participatory research group at the university, and it's just people from that university and their surroundings, and mostly it's autistic people are patients of that psychiatry ward, or at least they were diagnosed there. But in these two very different scenarios, we still found it pretty difficult to fund things that would be needed in order for autistic participants to be at least participating equally, because some of them don't really have any idea of how science works. So in order to be able to actually participate and like talk freely and even like just discuss things that they do not understand, they normally autistic people really need a lot of information in order to feel fine about speaking out on anything, really. So obviously there's this power imbalance between researchers and autistic people, and I think autistic people who speak English have a lot more like information and courses and things that they can look at in terms of participatory research, whilst us, we would need to kind of create at least some sort of like a course or something that they can educate themselves before they get into a participatory research project, because obviously the research project can be very like it's obviously a learning experience, and it can, like, researchers can provide every time specific information about the specific project, but some like more like higher order information, I think they would really be needed for autistic participants to be slightly less worried about, how useful their contribution can be. And as ORPA, we are trying to find funds for that, to actually fund a course, or at least like some sort of training that we can provide autistic participants, regardless of the project that they will be participating in as co-researchers. But that's not really easy to do, because like that's not a research project, and that's not science communication or dissemination. So what kind of funds can you apply for something like that? You should like put that into a like much bigger project, but then it would be linked to that project. And obviously even in the group, that would mean that the people actually managing the money would be, kind of in a different situation from people who are not in the institution where the money is. So that's, I think we're kind of, we don't have the structure in place for doing participatory research in Italy. And also awareness in general is not as high as in English-speaking countries, I think. I do science communication a lot. I like that. That's how I pay myself in order to conduct research for free. So that's something that I notice all the time when I like. I don't know, if I present my book or something, the questions are always way like lower level than they are in English speaking spaces. And that's a pity, and that's something that I think we could kind of help fixing with participatory research if we find ways to fund that. And obviously, as an independent researcher, I have even more problems with that. And something that I found difficult in terms of publishing is I like the idea of bringing double empathy discourse in more technical and traditional journals. I want people who research on theory of mind deficits and pragmatic deficits to look at that. So I try to send my papers to these kind of journals, and they always ask for a lot of ethical stuff, like ethical committee approval and like a lot of things that obviously I try to do that, but sometimes I'm like, I conducted a couple of focus groups with autistic people. I'm autistic myself. There's no harm in that. Why do you keep asking for ethical approval while you like go and publish APA filled papers where people, autistic people, have to endure horrendous audio stimuli to see when they have a meltdown. So that's something that I'm not against, of course, ethical committees, but I found it particularly difficult as an independent researcher who does not have access to one to be like held to the same standard of people having access to ethical committees and not using them properly, I'd say.
Thank you so much for these answers and also for these comments and reflections. I think that they are very useful in terms of also the topic of training, of course, also autistic members. I think it's a key topic, of course, in Italy. Also because I totally agree with Ilaria, which is our I mean, it's our responsibility to try to translate the comments, the suggestions in something which is scientifically sound. But at the same time, I think that in terms of power imbalance or in terms of the relationship between researcher and participants, it could be very useful if participants have some kinds of training in terms of what science is, how research studies work, because it could be also more, a more balanced relationship and also collaboration. So I totally agree with both of you, of course, and I think that both your perspectives are really useful. So maybe Ariel suggested that we can open the dialogue, we can move to the audience questions. So because we have only 5 minutes left. Sorry, I think I thought we would have more time to discuss and also to present something related to Italy. But we can organize another meeting maybe, or you can also give your email address and we can also have other kinds of exchanges also by email. So are there any questions or comments from the audience?
I just want to let you know that we can go an additional half hour and maybe even a little over. We routinely do that, so everyone can relax and enjoy the process. I actually
If
wrote
it's
a question.
okay for you, Ilaria and Eleonora, I know it's late. Okay.
No, it's super fine with me. Yeah.
Yes, whatever suits people, for sure. So I had a question I wrote in the comments. I think one of the major differences between autistic people and neuronormative people is the degree to which they can compartmentalize things very efficiently. And then on our side, everything is so interwoven: ideas, environment, sensory experiences. So given that holographic intersectionality, how might experimental models have to change to reflect holistic autistic experiences?
So that's a tough question. And I think that I don't have an answer, but I think that the process is really to try to, as much as possible, to start collaborating between autistic and non-autistic people right from the beginning by posing the research questions and the methodology on how to address these research questions. That's fundamental to start as soon as possible. Ideally, at the top ladder of participation is when the autistic community thinks of the research questions themselves and then ask for technical, let's say, support to researchers. That could be autistic, non-autistic, or whatever. And then they said, okay, we have this thing in mind and we think that these are crucial things that needs to be taken into account, but how can we do this? And then there's like cooperation in finding a way that makes sense, but is actually doable. And that's really the most powerful, I think, approach, because it really capitalizes on different perspectives. And I have to say that something that needs to be taken into account is the fact that for participatory research, we don't just need autistic researchers. Of course, autistic researchers are really needed in general because they have less opportunity to enter academia. There's less opportunity to find a job. We know all this. Being part of a minority that's got a lot of negative sides to it, and inequalities and injustices. And so we need more autistic researchers in all fields. But at the same time, for participatory research to happen, we don't just need autistic researchers, because they are embedded themselves in the power dynamics of research. So they're less, I think they could be less free and more also blocked in their way of thinking, because they're also researchers. So they take into account all the feasibility things. And while the important thing is that co-researchers need to be as similar as possible to experimental participants. So in participatory research, we need to involve as co-researchers community partners that are as similar as possible as participants, but they don't play the role of participants, but they play the role as co-researchers. So I don't know if this answers, but maybe provides some answer, some more basic answer to your question.
Perfect.
I think it's a problem with experimental research in general anyway, because like you need to have all of these categories set out beforehand, and like they're not very flexible, and you cannot really kind of yeah, it's hard data, it's not soft, and it's also like not that deep. You really just have these numbers at the end of the day, so you have to be very careful in deciding what counts as what, which is kind of the problem that we found ourselves into with the first participatory experience, because we were like, yeah, I mean, you have these numbers, but you coded these instances in a way that an autistic person would have never. So I think that's kind of the problem, because you have to be normative, if not neuronormative, when you conduct an experimental study. And I think that's why I haven't got them back to experimental research just yet, because it's really kind of frustrating when you're dealing with so many different and intersectionally different perspectives when you work with especially with neuroqueer people, but like in general, even just autistic people. Yeah, I also find it difficult to I agree with Ilaria, because I was trained as a scientist before I realized I was autistic. And I do see how different my perspective is from that of autistic participants who are not trained researchers. And I think it's very, very useful and very important that autistic researchers do not think of every kind of research that they do as participatory, as people had kind of told me when I first started. Because it's obvious that you're like, if as anybody else, right, your positionality kind of shapes the way you see things, and obviously my positionality as an autistic researcher is different from that of an autistic core researcher who's a participant and doesn't have a PhD. So that's absolutely true. Another thing that I found interesting when I tried to publish that study that was called participatory, even though it wasn't, is that at some point we fought in order to have our positionality statements in the article, although there usually aren't positionality statement in psychology, especially more like cognitive leaning papers. And at some point, like reviewers asked us in what ways the fact that we were autistic could have like impacted the way we interpreted the results of these focus groups with autistic people. And I found that interesting because we had to fight in order to have our positionality statement published, and then we were questioned about in what ways being autistic would have kind of skewed our interpretation of the results. And I'd like to see that happening with neurotypical researchers as well. But yeah, that's something that I found, but it's probably because I tried to publish something that was more qualitative into a more of a quantitative journal. But I do think it's important because like I'm enjoying getting in touch with critical studies and conducting some more critical research as well, and like critical thinking in general. But I do think it's annoying to me that like this field does not kind of penetrate, like the ideas that these field produce do not have like an impact on the way traditional research tends to like continues to be done. So I'm trying to do that, but it's kind of hard. Yeah.
I would like to add something that I think it's important that we find that in Italy at least, since autism participatory research is very new and has not been practiced much, and people are kind of confused of what it means and how it's done and why. There's one crucial problem in the sense that I think that non-autistic researchers and even some autistic people themselves with diminish, I don't know whether it's the word, but disregard, that's not disregard. Anyway, don't value much the perspective of autistic people as life expert of autism, like with experts in lived experience. So that's really important to acknowledge and realize that that's the most important role of autistic co-researchers. So, and that's it's equally valid and equally important as the experience, as the expertise in research itself. It's not that one is more important than the other. So they're equally important. They need be to equally valued. They are different, and we should remember that although people like autistic co-researchers might feel more confident and more at ease by knowing information about how research is done, but that's not their role in the sense that they can contribute. I'm not saying that they cannot contribute, but they should be they should feel empowered by the fact that their role is there to be life expert, and non-autistic researchers need to acknowledge and respect that. And that's, I think we are, at least in Italy, we are far from this, to really deeply value being life experts, with experts with lived experience. I don't know if that's the case. That does not let me just say one more thing. That's that not non si riduce a it's not just anecdotal experiences, and I share my anecdotal experience as a tiny dot, and then it adds to more anecdotal experience that, oh, we're all different. That dilutes the powerfulness of really valuing lived experience as a contribution to science, I think. I don't know whether I made myself be understood, sorry.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, experts by experience. We sometimes use it also in sociology, this term, also in psychiatry, in psychiatric survivor studies, and this is absolutely true. It's frustrating sometimes because we don't have. It's hard to find an acknowledgement of this kind of lived experience or experts by experience, and there is this power dynamics also because I think that the problem is that sometimes there is this prejudice that the point of view which is neutral, but it's not, of course. It has never been neutral, of course. You cannot be objective in your research study. I mean, I'm a qualitative methodologist, so I'm quite I'm totally convinced that our point of view, our positionality is always affecting what we are producing, how we are conducting research. So it's a matter of awareness, of course, of how your point of view, your personal experience, your way of interpreting, and also relating to the reality is affecting what you are doing. So it's absolutely, and also I think that it's very interesting what both you said, because it's a way to also in qualitative research, a way to foster sometimes the validity, of data is intersubjectivity, is to find a way to dialogue between different points of view, different also perspectives and experiences, and so it's absolutely crucial to have this kind of dialogue and also this between the point of view of the researcher, also of the non-autistic researcher, and the point of view of the autistic person. So it's sometimes maybe we should also, we as researchers and non-autistic researchers, find ways to really understand, as Ilaria said, what are the comments of the autistic people, because sometimes there are some we should find strategies, also communication strategies. We should be flexible, more creative, and also try to find to find new ways of doing research, so conducting research, not only with traditional methods, but sometimes also with other kinds of methods, which can be a little bit more more adapt to communicate, to understand, to really understand what other people are saying, and also to put into questions our prejudices, also our frameworks, because we all have, of course, frameworks and points of view and biases, of course. And are there any, sorry, it was like a comment, but it's because it was really rich and an inspiring seminar, of course. Are there any questions and comments?
Yep, I have one that's come up over and over again. Just to clarify, I'm autistic, and I'm an anthropologist. I'm doing qualitative research on autistic lived experience right now. I'm at candidacy. I'm in data analysis and writing mode, correct, at this present moment. So I'm thinking about these things a lot, actually. But what came up for me is overlooking the significance section alone, for example. What is the point of your research is one question that comes to mind. And I ask that about myself all the time, my own research. But I've also participated in almost 20 autism research studies now during the course of my doing this work, for a variety of reasons. Like Eleonora, you said how interesting it was to sort of tack back and forth between those identities. I was also trained in the natural sciences before I came to anthropology. So I know the paradigm well also. I also know the holes in it. And that's why I ask these questions. So what is the goal of the research in the first place? And Eliadia, you say, like, to understand our comments, but really, what is the point of studying autistic lived experience in the first place from a non-autistic standpoint? And that question is not, it's not rhetorical, and it's much more of a philosophical question that I don't think we can answer right now. But it's the same thing I posed to a young ABA student during a classroom presentation on the psychology of disability, who said, oh, I'm doing ABA because it's doing these new things. And I asked the person, I said, so what do you hope to achieve by doing that work? And they didn't have an answer, right? I know what I think the answer actually is on some level, but I'm not going to prefigure that for someone else, right? But the real relevance for me as an autistic person participating in research is not understanding the so-called scientific process, which is not particularly old itself, and if you know that history, it's got some problems, but there's something real there too. But it's not really that I need to understand the process of science. I need to understand the why of the research in the first place and where it goes. So, and just being listened to and able to say, hey, this question is worded very strangely. Do you mean this or do you mean this? Or these two things don't go together. Those are common problems that get overlooked in most so-called scientific publications on autism. They're not minor problems, they're not outliers, they're major flaws in the process itself. So that's what I would propose to you is, why do you want to know this stuff in the first place? What do you plan to do with that? And ultimately, from my standpoint, as an applied anthropologist, how does that help us as autistic people in the first place? So that's what comes to mind when I talk about and listen to all of these things. Not to discount the method, and you're right, sometimes the research is tedious and necessary. But if you're not clear on the ultimate end of that research, then we're not really doing what we think we're doing.
So I can try to provide an answer on. So, for example, of course, the participatory research on suicidality, our aim is to test the acceptability and feasibility of a adapted intervention to reduce the risk of suicidal behavior and suicidal thoughts. And that's, I think, really relevant in the short run for autistic people themselves, which are unfortunately really at higher risk of dying by suicide. And we presented this at a conference, like a 2 days congress on suicidality in Italy. And psychiatrists in Italy, they are so far behind. I mean, that psychiatrists don't even, in Italy at least, they don't even think that autistic people exist when they're over 18. They think it's child neuropsychiatrist only, and then you stop being autistic. So at least in Italy, if autistic people end up to a psychiatry service, public service, for co-occurring psychiatric conditions, either depression, anxiety, or suicidal attempts, they're not recognized as autistics, and if they don't know it themselves, and if they do, they're not believed anyway. So that's something that has got a real easy to tell in objective, and I hope it will have some relevance, because we are going to train Italian psychiatrists on this intervention, and then we're going to assess both on the perspective of the psychiatrists and on their autistic patients, because these are patients, because they are at risk for suicide, whether this intervention is acceptable, accessible, and feasible. And then, of course, we will need to have some studies at a later stage testing for its effectiveness. But we need much more money to do that. But going back to a more basic, it's not really basic science, but I mean, regarding our studies on experiences and of social touch, our idea was to validate autistic subjective experiences. Subjective experiences are of course important and are what provided the first, I mean, the insight and the questions. You know that sensory sensitivity differences entered the DSM manual only in 2013, and that was thanks to all autistic people that were saying, oh, you know what, we are perceiving sensory stimuli differently. And so we would like to try to validate with quantitative and objective measures the subjective experience. Why do we need to validate it? Because unfortunately, so on one hand is because unfortunately subjective experiences sometimes are disregarded. So they could be, and then if we show that being approached and touched by others evokes responses at different levels, behavioral, neurophysiological, physiological. We don't have the brain yet in the study, but we will in the future. Anyway, responses as if it were a threat, then we hope that people might take it more seriously. That's the idea. And then what contributes, what modulates these responses? So, for example, previous experiences of abuse, it's an important thing to take into account, but there could be other modulators of these responses. So I think in the faraway objective is to validate subjective experiences with other measures and then to try to make themselves being understood and regarded more. I think that's why we're doing this.
I'd like to answer that too, because I was thinking about it. Obviously, I do think about it all the time, but I was thinking about it through the lens of what we shared today. And I was thinking that I think part of the problem that I encounter when I'm trying to do participatory research without much money and without like the possibility to actually act as a PI in my own project, because right now I'm using my master's thesis to do some research that I needed an ethical committee for. So I kind of pushed the participatory part down to my supervisor's throat. And I think the problem is sometimes the objectives are more than one, at least they are to me. So I'm like at the same time and trying to benefit my community in the specific case of the study I'm conducting now. Since so in Italy we've started talking about neurodiversity and the neurodiversity movement just I think in the last 3 or 4 years, not much more than that, if we don't consider like very small communities that were concerned with that, like personally, but like in the wider public discourse, I think it's 4 or 5 years maximum. So nowadays it's more and more like of a buzzword, and it's been used by clinical professionals as well, neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and it's kind of I think it's devalued in a way, like its political stance, it's devalued because it's kind of being used as a synonym for neurodevelopmental disorders mainly. And the other thing is, since there's a lot of neurodiversity light content, I think some clinicians are kind of resisting the neurodiversity revolution, let's say, because they tend to think that people who are like supporters of the neurodiversity movement think of autism as just a difference and not something that is impactful in terms of like, or disabling. And that might kind of even hinder their ability to like change for the better in therapy, for instance, because they see that as part of their identity, so they don't want to move forward. They don't want to change even when that might be helpful for them. So I really wanted to kind of use I know it's not the way it should be done, but I wanted to use the master's tool to prove the master's wrong. So in some way, I feel like we do need some quantitative and experimental research, even though you can still do some participatory research on the side or even in the project. Like in my case, I'm using a measure that is built in a participatory way, but among many others that are like the usual measures that you would use for quality of life and psychological well-being and stuff like that. And I mean, I only have some preliminary statistical analysis done, but we do see that there's a moderated mediation effect of both being part of the neurodiversity movement and conceptualizing your condition in more of a neutral way rather than, you know, very heavy pathological reasoning around it on your quality of life. And like that's mediating the way like autistic traits, for instance, impact quality of life, which of course it still happens, but like the way, like if you take two people who have the same amount of autistic traits from a clinical point of view, and one is more of a supporter of the neurodiversity movement and conceives the condition as more of a neutral characteristic that they have, that's going to impact positively their quality of life. Or at least it's gonna like have like their autistic traits are gonna have less of an impact on their quality of life while living in a neuronormative and neurotypical world. And it's something that I couldn't have told my supervisor in any other way than like collecting these quantitative data with tools that they know about and showing them that that's what the numbers say and not just what, you know, the average autistic person that we can ask would have obviously told you the same thing, but that's not the way that science and like hard sciences or hard sciences wannabe kind of work, and that's I think where psychology kind of falls, especially when we go to this like cognitive and neuropsychological measures. They're trying hard to be hard sciences, so they need experimental work. And to kind of accept things that like a lot of autistic people would say, yeah, you could have just asked us, but that's the way it works, I think. So sometimes I do have to use things that I do not like, but if part of the objective is making some people realize that, even though they're not part of, you know, the same communities that I'm part of, thinking about positionality, etc. I mean, we cannot like get rid of psychologists just yet. So I think it's better to have them on our side.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's very important what you said, and also yes, also because in Italy it's something which is very brand new, and it's very important also to make I mean also the neurodiversity paradigm more yes, to avoid this kind of neurodiversity washing, which is for me, for example, is very dangerous, because I see it is quite widespread in different domains and disciplines, and it's also a way to diminish the importance of this paradigm shift. Like yes, it's also only a difference, or we are all different, and it's not a way of I mean human rights or civil rights. It's not a matter of discrimination and oppression. And so it's very important to also to foster the scientific I mean soundness of these paradigm, but also of the things that we want to show to these people who are unfortunately who are thinking like in this way. But it's also very important to try to communicate with them. With also their language, of course.
Dawn, do you want to? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Dawn. I didn't see you.
Oh, I was just going to say it's amazing to be. It's both difficult and amazing to be the Trojan horse You know, it's a very difficult line to walk. I do it myself all the time. There's the things you want to scream, and then there are the things you know you have to say calmly and with diplomacy so that they matter toward your ultimate end, right?
Totally. I just wanted to point out the connection between what we're just talking about, specifically in regards to the social model, sort of neurodiversity movement social model. I don't know if any of you are following what's been happening here in the U.S. and particularly in the medium of the New York Times through op-eds, editorial articles, that you can see this division and how it's the translation between medical models, biomedicine, this quote unquote scientific models of disability versus social models of disability. You can see how that's manifested over the last, say, 20 years or so, how it's sort of come to a head in those op-eds. I mean, really, the New York Times is pushing medical model frameworks. It's pushing the whole autism as a tragedy sort of model. And in fact, one of the people they interviewed for the article was a woman who a few years ago openly claimed that she had considered driving herself and her autistic child off of a bridge, right? For example, you know, so and that's the person whose voice they chose to elevate in this article. Okay, and so what I'm trying to point out here is power. Dawn, you named this first in the chat, but it's really power. So science, in this case, autism science in particular, is defending its turf viciously at the moment, and it's doing that through a variety of mechanisms. And you can see how social model neurodiversity movement proponents, and don't get me wrong, I'd be the first to say some of these voices are just so far out of touch with reality as to be laughable, and that exists across the spectrum, right? So I don't hold with any of that bit one way or another. I'm a parent also of autistic children, so I get those concerns as well. But I just want to point out how what's happening in Italy right now with all of this and some of the pushback of, oh, it's just a difference, is the same sort of thing that's happening right here, right now. And woke is just another sort of encompassing term for all of that sort of thinking, right? So I just want to point that out, and there are parallels between our political moment and Italian political history, right? And those two things can't be separated in the context of autism. So I just wanted to draw your attention to that. There might be something useful in seeing how that conversation is happening. And if anybody wants, there are some articles that are interesting that went back and forth between these two camps a few years ago, discussing things like anti-ableist language in autism research, for example. So this is a big conversation that's been happening for a while. And if you're not familiar with it, I'm happy to share resources.
Thank you so much. Would be
Very useful.
if you can share, if you can maybe send us some by these papers or resources,
By email.
would be fantastic for us. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah,
I wanna
honestly,
jump
like
in.
through social media, we have a lot of these courses that is just imported from the US without really having much of the same political climate nor social like inequities going on. I mean, we do have the social inequities, just not exactly the same, of course. So I think sometimes we just copy paste some of it without really understanding much of it. So that's happening, and I think I'm gonna face some issues because of that, because I'm using an American, or at least like English measure that I've translated for the neurodiversity movement identification, and it's probably a bit too yeah, I don't think Italy is ready for that. So I don't know whether to trust these data, but anyway, we'll see. Thank you. But anyway, yeah, I'll be glad to see whatever you have to share. Thank you. I'm sorry, I think I talked over Don Prince, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to see if anyone who hasn't taken a turn has a quick question before we stop, since I know it's late for you all over there.
I'd like to just say, you know, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've really valued all the different perspectives, and I'm a psychological researcher, so Eleonora, I'm glad that you are not discarding us, and in these discussions about methods, I'm constantly reflecting on my training in grad school, which is like not really adequate for the moment. You know?
Yeah, same, honestly.
Yeah. And I also have this, you know, oftentimes when I'm talking to autism advocates, kind of in that sort of social model perspective, which I'm in, I feel like there's a desire to kind of discard a lot of methodological research in psychology. And I feel like that's a huge problem, you know, like all of those methods, all that research, it's used on us every day, and it's going to be. And so we need to be understanding it and using it for our own ends, and in a way that actually benefits us. But it's so challenging to navigate that. And I've been listening to this conversation, especially when the notion of objectivity comes up, and it is so central to all of these concerns. And it's sort of this, it's like a hot potato that gets passed around and has a different meaning for everyone who holds it. You know? It's a really challenging core issue in the sciences. So,
well, here in the States, for sure, it's a cult of individuality. And what we've seen at Casey is that our minds don't work that way. We become more than the sum of the parts. So this is a basic paradigm difference that I really admire people who try to bridge that gap. So
Yeah, I think it's just kind of frustrating to me whenever I enter like critical autism studies spaces or critical neurodiversity studies spaces when I went to Durham, to see how deep and varied and like intersectional like the conversation is. And then I go back to psychological studies and that's like it feels like it's like from the 2000s, like the early 2000s, but that's something that we need to kind of face because that's also, I mean, most autistic people do still look for, you know, psychological support or even psychiatric support. And that's like, I think, of course, you're not gonna change the way these disciplines work. So obviously, we do have to deal with normative paradigms in quantitative research, etc. But I do think it's, I mean, to me, it's just frustrating and sometimes even a bit disheartening to see how wider and wider the gap between like critical studies and psychology, since we're still under a heavily like medical and or at least medicalized kind of perspective. I mean, this gap is just wider and wider, and I think if I were to just conduct critical studies and avoid looking at that, I would probably be much happier, but I think I would be a little bit more delusional. I mean, when I look at you know, the Italian situation, I think it's I mean, I'm really glad that people like Ilaria exist and they try to conduct quantitative research and even like experimental research in a way that is more like at least participatory, which kind of like help bridging this gap because it's getting wider and wider by the day, and I fear that we will not be able to kind of implement any of the insights that critical studies can provide to even like more like experimental and like I'm not going to say objective science because that's not objective to me, but obviously those branch of sciences that think that objectivity is a thing, and like even just shifting the idea of objectivity from an idea of like, you know, yeah, the truth versus something that people wrongly perceive of themselves from like just the perception of the self and perceptions of others. That's already something that I see happening, and that's something more achievable probably than just getting rid of the whole paradigm, because they just wouldn't do that. Yeah.
great. I think that's a perfect ending note. That really summed everything up wonderfully. I can't thank you guys enough. I'm always so uplifted when I hear from you, the things that you're trying to do. So, you know, relatively far away in a completely different culture. It means a lot to all of us, I know. We have a lot more sessions coming up, really great. So if you go to the Facebook page and swipe over to the right, you'll see the events tab. Everything we have is chronologically arranged there. And of course, we do take these videos and put them on Roger's channel after they've been sufficiently anonymized for people's safety. So we usually make an announcement when videos like of this today are released for everyone. So yeah, thank you again, and hopefully we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you for having us and staying with us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Grazie mille. Thank you. Thank you
Grazie
everyone for
mille.
joining us.
Arrivederci.